I was 24, working alone from 11 at night until 7 in the morning at the Pinecrest, a roadside motel off State Highway 18. That February, 6 second-floor rooms had been stripped after a pipe burst. Room 214 had bare concrete, plastic over the doorway, and no bed, television, or phone. Beside it, a maintenance stairwell was chained shut because the lower landing had rotten steps. On my third week, the front desk phone rang at 12:41 a.m. The display read 214. I answered with the usual greeting. For a few seconds, I heard a low hiss, like air moving through a vent. Then a man said, very quietly, "Your ice machine is loud." I told him room 214 was out of service and asked which room he was actually calling from. He hung up. We had 5 occupied rooms, none beyond 208. I figured the old phone system had assigned the wrong extension. Calls sometimes showed up as pool, even though the pool had been filled with gravel years earlier. At 116, a pickup pulled under the canopy. A man in a reflective work jacket came in, rubbing his hands, and asked for a ground floor room. I copied his license, gave him a key card for 108, and watched him carry a red duffel bag across the lot. The desk phone rang before his door closed. The display read 214. When I answered, the same voice said, "Red bag. Work boots." He hung up. The guest was already inside. From 214, there was no direct view of the first floor parking spaces. I told myself another guest was looking through a window and playing a strange joke. I called 208, where a utility crew had 3 rooms. Their foreman answered half asleep and said everyone was in bed. The Pinecrest security feeds ran through a monitor in the office. I brought up the second-floor camera. The hall was empty. Renovation plastic hung along one wall. Room 214 sat at the far end with blue painter's tape across the latch, and the chain service door beside it was closed. At 152, headlights swept across the lobby. A woman in blue hospital scrubs came in carrying a canvas grocery bag and asked if we had anything upstairs because she didn't like parking by the road. I put her in 203, across from the ice machine. As she climbed the outside stairs, I watched the hall camera. She appeared at the near end of the feed, found 203, and went in. The phone rang. "Blue shirt," the voice said. She dropped her key once. I had watched her the entire time. She had dropped the key card near the top step, outside the camera's view and nowhere near 214. "Who is this?" I asked. The man breathed into the receiver. "You keep looking at the camera," he said. I turned toward the monitor. Nothing had changed on the second floor. I locked the glass lobby doors and called my manager. He blamed moisture in the extension board, until I repeated what the caller had said about the camera. The contractors had left at 5, he told me. Nobody should be upstairs. He told me not to go into 214 and said he would drive over. At 209, the hall feed flickered into bands of gray. It cleared after a few seconds. The painter's tape across 214 was still there, but the chain on the service door was pulled almost straight. I unplugged the front desk handset. A moment later, a second phone in the back office began ringing. It was mounted beside the time clock, and its red line light was flashing. I let it ring 4 times. "The man in 108 is asleep," the caller said. "The woman is in the shower." I put the receiver down without answering. I called the county dispatch number from my cell. I told the dispatcher someone might be inside an out-of-service room and might be watching the guests. She asked if I had seen a person. I said no. She told me deputies were coming from the south end of the county and to stay in the locked lobby. I kept the hall feed full screen and called 108 and 203. I told both guests there was a maintenance problem and asked them to lock their doors and stay inside. The woman in 203 asked if she should leave. I told her not to step into the hall. At 218, room 214's door opened inward, about 2 inches. The blue tape stretched, peeled away from the frame, and hung from the knob. I could see only darkness through the gap. Then the service door beside it pressed outward against the chain. A man's face appeared between the door and the frame. He had close-cut hair and a narrow cheek. He wasn't looking down the hallway. He was looking directly at the camera. He stayed there for 2 seconds. Then his hand came through the gap and reached for the chain. I backed into the lobby and crouched behind the front counter. It was cheap particle board, and I knew it wouldn't stop anyone. The office phone rang once. It stopped. From above me came a heavy step, then another, crossing the ceiling from the direction of the stairwell. Dust shook from the vent over the mail slots. The locked doors were 12 feet away, but my car was under the second-floor walkway. I stayed down and held my cell against my chest. The dispatcher kept asking what I could hear. I whispered that someone was above the lobby. There was a scrape inside the wall behind the keycard machine. It moved from shoulder height toward the baseboard, slow and uneven. The return air grill beside my knee shifted outward. It was less than an arm's length away. One screw dropped onto the carpet, and the bottom edge opened wide enough for fingers to curl around it from inside the wall. I kicked backward, hit my shoulder on the cabinet, and crawled toward the locked front doors. The grill struck the carpet behind me. I heard someone drag a shoe or knee through the opening, but I didn't turn around. Then red and blue light moved across the lobby ceiling. I stayed on the floor until 2 deputies unlocked the doors with my manager's key. Room 214 was empty. Above the lobby, the service stairs opened into a narrow loft. A sheet of plywood had been laid across the ceiling joists, and the insulation beside it was pressed flat into a crawling path. Deputies found a sleeping bag, water bottles, canned soup, motel towels, and a battery lantern, covered with red plastic so its light would not show through the vents. Moved ceiling panels gave sight lines to the desk and exterior stairs. The grill beside the counter opened into the same space, close enough to reach from the plywood. A telephone line had been spliced into the motel's internal wiring with 2 taped copper joins. It ran to a cheap handset with the ringer removed, and someone had marked the junction 214 in black pen. Under the sleeping bag was a blank registration form, folded once down the middle. My first name was written in the box labeled guest. Every other box was empty. I still don't know whether he filled it out before that night or while I was sitting beneath him. I was 27, working nights on a medical surgical floor at a hospital outside a Midwestern city. I had been there a little over a year, long enough that the overnight routines felt more familiar than my apartment did. My shift ran from 7 p.m. to 7:30 in the morning. Around 2, if admissions were quiet, one of us went to the basement storeroom for sheets, tubing, and other supplies. I usually volunteered because the trip gave me 12 quiet minutes away from the alarms upstairs. On a Tuesday in November, I took service elevator C, down at 2:18 a.m. A linen cart stood crooked beside the storeroom door, though empty carts were normally kept by the loading dock. When I pushed it aside, tape ripped, and I found a black prepaid phone fastened beneath its lower shelf, with 2 strips of silver duct tape. One strip had come loose, leaving the phone hanging by its charging cord. I assumed an employee had hidden it to avoid getting caught using it on shift and peeled it off to give to security. The screen came on without a passcode. There were no messages or contacts, only the factory apps and a photo gallery. The newest thumbnail showed a beige metal door. I opened the gallery, thinking the pictures might identify the owner, and found shots of the loading dock, a housekeeping closet, and the basement elevator panel. Then I saw myself. It had been taken in the employee parking garage at 6:43 p.m. I was walking toward the staff entrance with my lunch bag over one shoulder. The picture was dated 11 days earlier. It was zoomed in enough that I could see the little white mark on my left shoe. The next image showed me eating alone in the cafeteria. Another showed me pressing the button for elevator C, and another caught the back of my head through its closing doors. I looked into the corridor. The basement had painted concrete walls, exposed gray pipes, and motion sensors that switched off one section at a time. Nothing moved. I heard only the air handler and the clicks of cooling lights. I tried to make it a coworker's joke until I checked the dates. The gallery covered 6 weeks, including a Sunday shift I had traded for that same afternoon. Whoever took the pictures knew when I arrived, which entrance I used, where I ate, and when I went downstairs. There were 214 files. Some were blurred or duplicated. Between them were clear shots taken through door windows, between supply shelves, and from parked vehicles. One showed our nurse's station schedule board with my last name circled in thin red ink. The closest pictures were from our own floor. One showed me bending over a medication cart while a patient's call light reflected in the window behind me. The angle put the photographer inside an equipment alcove less than 20 feet from our station. Another showed my apartment key lying beside my cafeteria tray. I put the phone in my scrub pocket and walked toward the storeroom door. I wanted to get back into the elevator, but the display above it read 6. The call button did nothing for several seconds. That happened sometimes when staff were moving patients. While I waited, I opened the newest image again. The beige door had a dent beside its handle and a blue inspection sticker at eye level. It was the storeroom door behind me. The picture faced into the room through its wired glass window. A strip of my blue scrub sleeve was visible inside. Its timestamp was 2:20 a.m. My watch said 2:22. The display above elevator C still reads 6. In the corridor, one section of motion lights went dark, then the next. The section directly outside the wired glass window stayed lit, although I could not see anyone standing there. I shut the storeroom door and turned its thumb lock. On my own phone, I called our charge nurse and whispered for her to send security through the stairs, not the elevator. Across the storeroom was a steel pass-through into pharmacy receiving. My badge opened it. On the other side, ceiling-high chain-link cages lined a narrow aisle. I eased the door closed and crouched between the last cage and the concrete wall, behind cases of saline. The gap barely fit me. My shoulder pressed the chain link, and through a space beneath a shelf I could see the bottom of the pass-through. At 2:24, the handle moved. Once, slowly. Then again, someone on the storeroom side pressed their weight against the door and held it there. The security dispatcher texted that officers were coming through the main stairwell. I silenced my phone but kept the call connected, answering her questions one word at a time. The pressure left the door. For 10 seconds, there was only the ventilation fan. Then the linen cart moved. One wheel had a flat spot that made a soft bump on every rotation. Bump. Roll. Bump. Roll. It crossed the storeroom and stopped outside the pass-through. The latch lifted. I had not checked whether the door locked from the other side. It opened an inch. A hand in a pale work glove curled around its edge. The door opened wide enough for the person to enter. I saw dark work pants, black rubber shoes, and no badge or skin. They pulled the cart in behind them and let the door close. Before moving down the aisle, they crouched beside the cart and felt under the shelf where the phone had been. Then they straightened and waited, blocking the only door back to the storeroom. The aisle was too narrow to turn the cart, so they left it crosswise and walked past the first cage. Each rubber sole squeaked once on the sealed floor. They stopped at the second cage, leaned close, then moved to the third. Mine was the fourth. The person reached my cage and dragged one gloved finger along the wire, inches from my face. I held my breath. The finger stopped beside my cheek. The cage shifted with a small metal pop, and the person gripped it as if testing whether it would move. A radio crackled beyond the pass-through. The gloved hand released the wire. The person hurried toward the far end of receiving, shoved through a fire door, and disappeared into the old laundry wing before officers entered. I came out only after the dispatcher sent me an officer's badge number. Security found the cart behind a fire door with a disconnected alarm. They found no one. A facilities manager later told me, "There's an old linen rail passage above the laundry ceiling with one access panel behind dock pallets and another inside the mechanical closet by elevator C. We found fresh shoe marks, food wrappers, and a copy of the night housekeeping schedule up there. The phone held older deleted files. The earliest recoverable photograph showed me at employee orientation, seated with 12 new hires 8 months before I found the cart. At that time, I worked days on another floor and had never used elevator C. I transferred hospitals before year's end. The passage was sealed, and cameras and alarms were added. No one was identified. I still avoid service elevators. I also still wonder why the last picture was taken before the person entered the storeroom, when every earlier photograph had been taken from a place where they could stay hidden. I was 19, working the overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of a small desert town. The highway ran past us in a straight line, with 26 miles of open scrub between our lot and the next place that stayed open all night. The station was an old cinder block building with 4 pumps out front and an unused service bay on the east side. At midnight, I locked the glass entrance and served people through a sliding drawer under the register window. A printed sign on the door explained it, but customers still pulled the handle first. Behind the counter was a narrow stockroom with cases of soda stacked to the ceiling. Its metal delivery door opened onto the west side of the building, where the security light had burned out 2 weeks earlier. Until it was fixed, we kept that door deadbolted after sunset. Most of my shift was coffee, inventory sheets, and truckers buying fuel. I knew the regular traffic by sound. Big rigs came in low and slow, and local pickups rolled straight to Pump 2. At 2:18 that morning, a dark green van came in from the west and circled behind the pumps before stopping near the edge of the lot. It was an older Chevrolet with dust over the rear plate. The driver left the engine running and parked with the passenger side facing the store. I noticed because he didn't pull near a pump. A man got out and walked up to the entrance. He looked about 40, with work boots, jeans, and a gray thermal shirt. He kept looking back at the van. He pulled the locked door once, read the sign, then knocked on the glass. I slid open the small metal cover over the drawer. "What can I get you? You need to open up," he said. "My wife's hurt." He pointed toward the van. Its windows were dark except for the 2 rear ones, which were cloudy with condensation. I asked what had happened. "She fell." She's bleeding pretty bad. I need help getting her out." His voice was level, just flatter than I expected from someone whose wife was supposedly bleeding in a parking lot. I told him I couldn't unlock the door, but I could call an ambulance. I reached for the store phone. "No ambulance," he said quickly. "We're taking her ourselves. I just need another set of hands." That was the first thing that felt wrong. People worried about ambulance bills, and people got strange when they were scared. I asked if she was conscious. He leaned down toward the drawer, close enough that I smelled cigarettes on his shirt. "Come look. You'll understand." I said again that I wasn't allowed outside after midnight. He stepped back and glanced over his shoulder. The van's side door was closed. "She's in the back," he said. "Door's open." "It'll take 2 seconds." It wasn't open. I could see the handle and the unbroken line of the sliding door. I pointed that out. He turned, stared at it for a moment, then gave a small shake of his head, as though his wife must have closed it. "Okay," he said. "I'll open it. You just come out." He walked halfway to the van, stopped, and looked back to see whether I was unlocking the door. I picked up the phone instead. He came back fast and put his palm against the glass. "Don't call anybody." "We don't have time for that. I told him an ambulance was already on the way." It wasn't. I hadn't dialed yet. His expression changed for less than a second. His jaw tightened, and his eyes moved from me to the lock beside the door. Then he stepped away and started tapping the glass with one knuckle. Tap. 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 "Please," he said. My wife could die in that van. I dialed 911 under the counter where he couldn't see. While it rang, I kept watching the van. The dispatcher asked for the station location. I gave it quietly. The man kept tapping and talking over me, repeating that I needed to be a decent person. Then something moved behind the fogged rear window. 4 fingertips pressed against the glass from inside. They appeared near the bottom corner, pale ovals in the condensation, and dragged upward about 6 inches. A 5th fingertip joined them. The hand dropped out of sight. The man turned toward the van. He had seen it too. I told the dispatcher there was definitely someone in the back. She asked whether I could see an injury. I said no. The man faced me again and spread his hands. "See? She's asking for help," but the fingers hadn't moved like someone waving. They had pressed slowly and then disappeared all at once, as if pulled down. I backed away from the window. He followed me along the glass, keeping himself lined up with me. "What's your wife's name?" I asked. He tapped harder. "Open the door. Tell me her name. She can't breathe." You told me he never answered. "She can't breathe." He never answered. The dispatcher said deputies were coming from town, but the closest unit was at least 15 minutes away. She told me to stay inside and move somewhere the man couldn't see me. Yeah, I should have gone straight into the office. Instead, I kept looking at the van because I was afraid the person inside would put a hand up again and I would miss it. That was when I noticed movement in the convex mirror above the beer cooler. The mirror was there so we could see the short aisle beside the counter. It also caught part of the station's west wall through a small stockroom window. Then a second man stepped through the strip of light behind the building. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He was moving close to the wall, bent slightly at the waist. He looked toward the front lot once, then slipped into the darkness beside the stockroom door. I had been watching the first man so closely that I never saw the second one get out of the van. I also couldn't remember checking the stockroom deadbolt when my shift started. I ran behind the counter and pushed through the stockroom door. The dispatcher was still in my ear, asking what I saw. The delivery door was closed. The thumb turn on the deadbolt pointed sideways. Locked. I reached it just as the exterior handle moved. It turned down and held there. I stopped with my hand inches from the lock. The handle lifted, then turned again, slower this time. The metal door shifted inward against its frame with a dull bump. I whispered that someone was at the back entrance. The dispatcher told me to get away from it. I took one step backward. A thin silver tip slid into the seam near the latch. It worked up and down, scraping paint from the frame. The door flexed inward, far enough for the weather stripping to show. Whoever was outside leaned into it again, and 2 cases of bottled water stacked beside the door trembled. From the front of the store came a heavy bang. The first man had stopped tapping. He hit the entrance with the flat of his hand and shouted that his wife was dying. The back door jolted at nearly the same moment. They were timing it. I crouched behind the soda cases, because there was nowhere else to go. The office door was across the store, in view of the front windows, and I couldn't make myself run for it. I held the phone against my chest and watched the deadbolt shake in its bracket. The dispatcher kept talking. I only remember her telling me not to answer either man. The silver tool disappeared. For a few seconds, nothing touched the back door. Then 3 quiet knocks came through the metal, right beside my head. The deadbolt turned a fraction of an inch. I grabbed the thumb turn with both hands and held it sideways. Pressure came from the other side. The lock pressed into my palms hard enough to hurt. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. At the front, the other man yelled, "She's opening it." Come on, I still don't know who he meant. An air horn sounded from the highway. White headlights swept across the stockroom window as a semi turned into the lot. Its brakes released with a long hiss, and the pressure against the deadbolt vanished. I stayed on the floor. In the convex mirror, I saw the man at the front look toward the truck and slap the glass once. Then he ran. The second man crossed behind the building and reached the van first. He yanked open the sliding door, climbed inside, and pulled it shut. The other man got behind the wheel. They left without turning on their headlights, cutting across the gravel shoulder and heading west. No woman ever came out of that van. The trucker parked across the entrance and waited in his cab until the deputies arrived. He said he had stopped because he'd seen a man running along the side of the building and thought the station was being robbed. The deputies checked the doors and searched the lot with flashlights. Near where the van had been parked, one of them found 2 heavy black zip ties on the gravel. Both had been cut near the locking heads. One was still bent into a narrow loop. They also found fresh pry marks on the stockroom frame. The deadbolt had held, but the lower hinge had shifted enough that the door scraped the floor for months afterward. The rear plate number I gave them belonged to a sedan, reported stolen in another county. No camera had a clear view of the driver, and our camera on the west wall was only a dummy housing. The van was never found. I quit the next week. For a long time I told myself the fingers belonged to the wife and that the men had panicked because they had warrants or drugs in the van. But that explanation never fit the second man moving toward the door while the first one kept me looking straight ahead. I still think about the hand on that fogged window, and whether it was asking me to come outside or warning me not to,